Do not trust Vladimir Putin. That's the message that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has delivered to US President Donald Trump on the eve of an in-person meeting between Trump and Putin. Trump believes that the meeting could be an important first step toward achieving peace in Ukraine, but these types of steps have been taken before. Ukraine won't be fooled. Peace talks are Russia's latest Trojan horse, and Ukraine knows that only victory will end an invasion that Russia has no intention of stopping. On August 15th, Trump will welcome Putin to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska. The peace talks, unlike any others that we've seen during the Ukraine war. This isn't a conversation over the phone. It's not the US and Russia sending delegates to Saudi Arabia. It's Trump and Putin meeting face-to-face on US soil to see if they can hash out the initial terms for bringing an end to the Ukraine war. That's what Trump is hoping. Trump appears to be hedging his bets a little with his choice of location. As AP News points out, the Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson once served as one of the US's key bases during the Cold War era. It's much quieter now. However, it's still home to F-22 Raptor stealth fighter jets, which the US uses to this day to intercept Russian aircraft that venture into US airspace. Benjamin Jensen of the Center for Strategic and International Studies says the choice of location has more to do with a show of force than with choosing a convenient location. For President Trump, it's a great way for him to show American military strength while also isolating the ability of the public or others to intervene with what he probably hopes is a productive dialogue. In other words, Trump is rightfully wary. He knows that Russia's leader loves to use manipulation and intimidation as tactics to get what he wants, so Trump intends to give him a taste of his own medicine on August 15th. At least that's what Trump wants to present. To many in Ukraine, including its president, who isn't involved in this exclusive meeting, Russia's peace talks are nothing but a wolf in sheep's clothing, a bluff, a ruse, an attempt by Putin to curry favor with Trump so he can get what he's wanted all along, the complete subjugation of Ukraine. And Zelenskyy isn't shy about letting Trump know that being wary isn't enough. On August 13th, The Hill reported that Zelenskyy, along with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and several other European leaders, held a video conference with Trump to prepare for the upcoming meeting. None of those leaders, nor Zelenskyy, will be present, so the call offered them a chance to influence the course of the upcoming meeting, ensuring the US, Ukraine, and its allies are all on the same page. Zelenskyy appears to have left that chat feeling cautiously optimistic. However, he delivered a message to Trump after the video conference telling the US leader that Putin is bluffing if he claims that he wants any form of real peace. Ukraine's president also said that he told Trump to pay attention to any attempts he makes to downplay the impact that Western sanctions are having on Russia. In reality, the sanctions are effective and they're hurting the Russian military economy, The Hill reports Zelenskyy is saying to Trump. Plus, Zelenskyy told Trump that one idea is squarely off the table: ceding or exchanging land. I stress that any questions concerning our country's territorial integrity cannot be discussed without regard for our people, for the will of our people, and the Ukrainian constitution, Zelenskyy said when speaking alongside Merz. We'll come back to the land-swapping idea later in the video, but for now, Zelenskyy's message is clear. Trump can't trust a word that comes out of Putin's mouth. Ukraine's president is far from the only person saying so. In an August 13th piece for The Guardian, Raphael Baer points out that Trump choosing to swallow Putin's lies is an even larger threat to Ukraine than the bombs and drones Russia is sending to Ukraine's cities every day. That's a pretty big claim, especially after a July in which Russia launched 6,297 drones at Ukraine in a record-breaking month. Baer says that Putin has to believe that Ukraine's defeat is inevitable because even considering any other scenario, even a ceasefire that allows Russia to retain 20% or so of Ukraine that it's captured since February 2022, would be a failure in Putin's eyes. Russia's leader is on a mission fueled by faux history and an egotistical desire to position himself as one of the most lauded leaders in Russian history. And Putin will say whatever he thinks he needs to say to keep Trump off his back so he can continue his brutal invasion. The Alaska meeting, Baer says, is only happening in the first place because Trump started setting deadlines for a Ukraine war ceasefire. This is appeasement, not potential peace. In harsh words, Baer adds, Putin will use the encounter to frame the conflict in terms that chime with Trump's warped and historically illiterate reading of the story. It's the version in which a devious, criminal Zelenskyy bamboozles a senescent Joe Biden into throwing away heaps of US treasure on a crazy losing bet. The war is nearly won anyway, Putin will say. Ukraine cannot prevail, but can sucker its allies into throwing good money after bad. While this may be unfair to Trump in some respects, it's a competent outlining of the lies that Zelenskyy wants the US president to be able to identify. The Ukraine war didn't start because Zelenskyy tricked former President Joe Biden into sending funds. It started because Putin invaded. Heaps of US treasure aren't being thrown away. They're being used to ensure Russia can't become a bigger threat than it already is. And as for the war nearly being won, There's still 80% of Ukraine left to conquer. There's also the issue of Putin's respect for Trump to consider. He has none. Russia's leader may say otherwise publicly, but the reality is that Putin doubts the US president's ability or desire to follow through on the deadlines and threats of sanctions that led to this Alaska meeting in the first place. That's according to Reuters, which published an exclusive report on August 5th, quoting several unnamed Russian sources with knowledge of the Kremlin's approach to Trump. One of those sources says that Trump's sanctions threat is viewed as painful and unpleasant, but wouldn't be considered a catastrophe. Why? As another source told Reuters, the prevailing opinion in Moscow is that there's not much more that they can do to us. If Putin is entering the Alaska meeting with that kind of mindset, any leverage that Trump might have disappears. Yes, Russia's leader doesn't want the meeting to go down in flames, leading to more sanctions against Russia, but he knows that nothing changes when it comes to his invasion if that happens. The lack of respect or fear of reprisals will just fuel Putin to push even harder with his lies to get what he wants. And what he wants has never changed. Complete control over Ukraine is still the objective, as it always has been. Mykola Bieliskov made that point in a March article for the Atlantic Council when Putin first started his evasive responses to a potential ceasefire. Since the early years of his reign, he has made no secret of the fact that he views the collapse of the USSR as a tragedy and regards the post-Cold War order as an injustice, Bieliskov says of Putin. Crucially, Ukraine has come to embody both of those grievances. Putin firmly believes that he cannot hope to achieve his historic mission of reversing the verdict of 1991 and reviving the Russian Empire without first extinguishing Ukrainian independence. Everything that Russia's leader has shown the world since these words were published only reinforces that point. Every ceasefire proposal put forth has been evaded. Aerial strikes against Ukraine are stronger and more rampant than ever before, as we mentioned earlier. Putin may still talk of peace. He may even believe that's what he wants. The problem is that Putin's version of peace involves Ukraine no longer existing. A war can't continue when one of the countries is successfully subjugated. That's no peace except in the eyes of the authoritarian doing the subjugating, and if the subjugator gets his way, in the eyes of the one world leader he'll be speaking to on August 15th. Of course, Putin won't tell Trump that he expects the US to withdraw all support in order that Ukraine surrender to Russia outright. That's too direct, and Putin knows that Trump won't go for that based on the global reaction that would result. It's here where the Trojan horse comes into play, something that we touched on earlier in the video, and Zelenskyy is adamant it will never happen. A land swap. The worrying thing from Ukraine's perspective is that it doesn't seem like Trump is averse to the idea of Ukraine ceding land to Russia to accelerate a move toward peace. As The Independent noted on August 12th, Trump has in the past criticized Zelenskyy for refusing to give parts of occupied Ukraine to Russia as part of a peace deal. Granted, the criticism came at a time when the relationship between Trump and Zelenskyy was far more fraught than it is now, but it shows that the idea of a land swap of some description is at least something that Trump has considered. On August 11th, Trump confirmed that this concept was still on his mind. Speaking to reporters, Trump said that there would be some land swapping going on, according to The Independent. Such swaps would involve some bad stuff for both Russia and Ukraine. It's unclear what Trump meant by bad stuff. The implication seems to be that both sides would have to give up land to the other as part of a swap deal. But if that's the case, and the deal is based on occupied land, Ukraine ends up with the short end of the stick. Such a deal would see it officially lose Crimea, along with much of the Donbas region, huge portions of South Ukraine and the small areas of Sumy that Russia's forces have managed to take during their summer offensive. In return, Ukraine would receive a tiny slice of Kursk, and how much of that is still up for debate. Back in June, the BBC reported that Ukraine still holds about 35 square miles of the oblast, that it counter-invaded in August 2024. Is that still the case? Even if it is, 35 square miles is a bad trade for 20% of your country. Still, it seems to be a trade that Trump is considering. It's also one that Ukraine will outright refuse. Part of the reason comes down to Ukraine's constitution. In an August 13th article, The Independent quoted Zelenskyy as stating that Ukraine will not give Russia any awards for what it has done. Even if a land swap was seen as a viable option by Ukraine's leader, he wouldn't be able to go through with it. Ukraine's borders were set in 1991 and enshrined in the country's constitution, and Zelenskyy, despite being Ukraine's president, doesn't have the authority to sign off on a single change to those borders. That's without even considering the terrible impact that this course of action would have on Zelenskyy's status as Ukraine's leader. After more than 3 years of fighting for every scrap of territory Russia has occupied, an order to roll over and allow Russia to claim what it illegally holds would spell the end of Zelenskyy. It would also spell the end of Ukraine, which brings us to the second part of the reason why Ukraine will refuse a land swap. Russia would only use the land it ends up occupying as a springboard for a future invasion of the rest of Ukraine. Zelenskyy says as much himself, as The Guardian reports. "We will not leave Donbas. We cannot do it," Zelenskyy says. For Russians, Donbas is a springboard for a future new offensive. Ukraine's president has a point. Though the Donbas doesn't represent all of Ukraine, it's perhaps the most strategically significant portion of the country outside of Kyiv itself. The reason is abundantly clear based on the hundreds of thousands of soldiers Russia has lost trying to take the region since Putin launched his invasion. The Donbas is Ukraine's fortress. Or more specifically, parts of the region are referred to as the Fortress Belt of Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War says that this belt includes 4 major Ukrainian cities and a number of small settlements that run north to south along the H20 Konstantinivka-Slovyansk highway. Stretching for about 31 miles, it's a rock-solid line of defense into which Ukraine has spent 11 years pouring significant resources into establishing infrastructure. The belt is what's holding Russia back from taking the Donbas and moving deeper into Ukraine. If a land swap is part of whatever peace deal Trump and Putin create on August 15th, you can guarantee that Russia will want to get its hands on the Fortress Belt. Even if that doesn't happen, occupying so much of the territory behind the belt will be a problem for Ukraine. Both countries involved in the Ukraine war are drained. That's the obvious consequence of the attritional tactics that Putin has used throughout his supposed special military operation. If Russia gets its hands on the Donbas, it gets to fortify the entire region, especially if it also claims the Fortress Belt itself. Once those fortifications are completed, it will become even harder for Ukraine to break back into parts of the country that Russia occupies. Time and money will be poured into the Russian military as those fortifications are set up, and eventually, Putin will just invade again. Only this time he'd invade from inside what will be the former Ukraine. That's the Trojan horse that Ukraine is so worried about. If Russia receives the Donbas as part of a peace deal, it will be equivalent to allowing the country to bring more of its troops than it already has into the region, unopposed by Ukraine's forces. The next invasion could come from inside Ukraine itself, likely bolstered by Belarus, a Crimea that is also under Russia's control, and perhaps even the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Ukraine's remaining forces would be surrounded. Even with time to refortify, they'd be starting the second round on the back foot. So it's clear what Ukraine doesn't want to happen on August 15th. It doesn't want to hear any suggestion that it should give up land to Russia as part of a peace deal. And it doesn't want Donald Trump to fall for all the lies it believes Putin will inevitably tell. The Trump factor is in play. And nobody can guess what the US president will do or say once he's in a room with Putin. Some believe that Trump speaking to Russia's leader face-to-face is a recipe for disaster. Those are the exact words used by The Guardian's reporter Andrew Roth. He points to when the two world leaders met in 2018 to discuss issues with the US-Russian relationship on neutral ground in Helsinki as an example. Part of that discussion covered Russia's campaign of aggression inside Ukraine prior to the launch of the full-blown invasion. By the time he came out of the room, Trump looked dazzled by the Kremlin leader. Asked at a press conference about the conclusions of the US intelligence community that Russia had interfered in the elections, Trump said, "President Putin says it's not Russia. I don't see any reason why it would be," Roth writes. A repeat of 2018 is the worst-case scenario. If Putin can weave words well and drip enough honey into Trump's ear, some believe the US president is susceptible to Putin's manipulative charms. Others are more optimistic. Among them are several European leaders. We mentioned earlier that those leaders held a video conference call with Trump and Zelenskyy to discuss the August 15th meeting. The BBC reported that France's President Emmanuel Macron stated that this conference call allowed Europe to collectively clarify Trump's intentions and express our expectations about what the meeting will cover. Trump also seemed to be happy about the conference call, with the Kyiv Post saying the US president rated it at a 10, presumably out of 10, while calling it friendly and very good. These sorts of words will give hope to Zelenskyy that Trump is still very much on Ukraine's side, and that he'll be arguing for Ukraine on August 15th. More hope comes from Trump himself. According to the Kyiv Post, Trump said that any future talks with Putin are conditional on Russia's leader agreeing to a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. What if that doesn't happen? Trump was asked the question, and his response suggests that he'll land on Ukraine's side. "I don't want to say, but there will be very severe consequences. What those consequences might be is still up for debate, though the secondary sanctions and tariffs with which Trump threatened Russia to bring Putin to Alaska in the first place seem like a safe bet. Under those measures, the US won't be sanctioning or tariffing Russia directly. Instead, it would look to hurt Russia's economy by punishing the countries that buy Russian products, such as gas and oil, with tariffs. An indirect punishment perhaps, but if it's enough to convince a major buyer of these products such as China or India to change suppliers, Russia would lose billions of dollars that Putin is using to fund his war machine. Trump will also presumably bring some knowledge of what Ukraine wants out of a peace deal to his meeting with Putin. On August 13th, CNN reported on the 5 principles that Zelenskyy had outlined for any negotiations to go beyond Trump's upcoming meeting with Putin. First, Ukraine must be involved in any discussions that have anything to do with Ukraine. Second, such discussions must be trilateral and conducted under ceasefire conditions. Next, Ukraine must receive truly reliable security guarantees from its Western partners and Russia itself. The fourth condition is that Russia cannot receive any right to veto Ukraine's attempts to gain membership in NATO or the European Union. And finally, sanctions must be strengthened if there is no agreement to come to a ceasefire on August 15th. Trump likely knows about these principles. We can assume Zelenskyy shared them during the video conference call, and the cautious optimism being expressed by European leaders suggests that Trump may have taken them on board. Still, so much depends on a face-to-face meeting to which Zelenskyy won't be a party. He, Ukraine, and Europe won't know what's said behind closed doors until that meeting is over and reports start coming out. All can only hope that Trump sees through Putin's latest attempts to pretend he wants peace as he intensifies his war and doesn't make concessions that Ukraine isn't willing to grant. Ukraine is anticipating that one of the lies Putin will tell is that a Russian victory is not only inevitable but looming. That isn't the case. Crimea is slowly slipping out of Russia's grip, and the latest elite Ukrainian night raid deep into the peninsula has only made things worse for Putin. Find out more about that raid in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more up-to-date coverage of the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.